Call to order the Sorry. Call to order the meeting, Planning Commission meeting of Thursday, June 6th. We'll establish a quorum, and everyone is here except for Commissioner Brezak. Public comments on items not on the agenda. If anyone would like to talk about something that's not on the agenda, please bring up a speaker card. I don't have any. And saying that doesn't look like there are any, we'll close that and go to the consent calendar and approval of the Planning Commission minutes.
I had one slight change under what my discussion comments were, where it says consider alternative window designs. I think it's more accurate to say consider consistent window designs.
And with that amendment, I'd move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. And we will move next to the public hearing. Sorry, is that right? Study session?
No,
What do we have? That's
So
been continued.
probably, if you want to announce it, we did have a study session scheduled for 441st Street. However, at the request of the applicant, who needed to make some revisions to the packet, that item has been continued to a date certain of July 18th, 2019, so it won't be considered at tonight's meeting.
Perfect. And so with that, we'll move to the public hearing, 425 First Street.
Yes, good evening, Chair, members of the Commission. Zach Dahl, Planning Services Manager with the City of Los Altos. This item before you is a multifamily project at 425 First Street. This item was originally considered by the Commission at your last meeting and continued with direction to the applicant to address design concerns raised by the Commission. The applicant has made some changes to the proposed design and has provided with an updated set of plans and an alternative set of plans. And so, as noted in the staff report, he took the project and made some changes per the Commission's recommendations. He also did include an alternative version which went with a more contemporary design. The item before you right here, this is the project with the design revisions, but kind of keeping the similar appearance as you originally reviewed. The main change, there were some cleanups to the stone wainscoting to create a more consistent transition. The roof material was updated from a barrel tile, clay barrel tile, to a standing seam metal. And there was some other more minor aesthetic changes to window rhythm, trim details, and if you look at the rear garage, the originally was more of a wood panel door that was proposed, and now that has been changed to a higher quality but a more standard metal grate. Overall, I'll keep my presentation brief and then let the applicant take over, and then he can also provide more information on the alternative design that was provided to you as well. So with that, based on these changes, it does appear to have addressed the Commission's concerns, so staff is recommending approval, but then also consideration of this alternative design as part of your final action. The main changes are just the exterior design details, as the basic massing and footprint floor plans of the building are the same for either of those design alternatives. And if you were to recommend approval, you would use it, go with it using the draft resolution contained in attachment A from the earlier staff report that is attached, and that contains the findings and conditions. So with that, I am available if you have any questions.
Any questions for staff?
So it looks like you're showing the darker roof as the proposal and the alternate as the lighter one, but it's kind of labeled the other way around on the plans, at least our cover sheet. Because the first page of the darker one says First Street perspective looking east, alternate metal roof. So I don't, and maybe Jeff can clarify when he's,
Yeah, I think there was some confusions with the sets of plans, and I think there was, the original one was going to continue to have the clay barrel tile with the alternative with the standing seam metal, but then I think what ultimately got submitted was The primary updated version was the alternate with the standing seam metal, and then the other alternate was the more contemporary overall treatment of the building.
Any other questions? Okay, so we'll call up the applicant.
Jeff Wormuth. I'll be brief too, because I've already presented. I'm going to reserve most of my time for Jeff Potts to talk about the alternate in a second, but we'll get you there. So again, staff did a great, very thorough job with their report and their presentation. Again, kind of the goal is to create a great place for people to live, future or current residents of Los Altos downtown, which is an amazing place to live. And this project is the smaller units, as we've talked about, affordable by design. As we've talked about, there's no development incentives, no development waivers, no waivers of development standards. This project is completely consistent with all of the objective standards in the city. The roof is 33 where 35 is allowed to the flat roof, so it's 35 to the midpoint. The parapet's 9 feet below what's allowed. The elevator override is 6 feet below what's allowed. Honestly, the smarter fiscal decision as the property owner would have been to go 4 stories, to go 13 feet taller with a more modern design, to go with larger units. But that wasn't what the decision that I made was, to try and be sensitive to the neighborhood, even though we have some 4-story buildings on First Street and we've got some more planned in the future. Our goal was to try and make this one more sensitive to the neighborhood. I want to talk a little bit about process. The design you see in front of you, without the changes that you all most recently made, was submitted 8 months ago with almost no changes from what you see. 7 months ago, we got an overwhelmingly positive response from the peer review. Now, one of the reasons I tell you that is because at that time we had considered also a modern, more traditional, or more contemporary design, but because the peer review was so overwhelmingly positive about the design, we shelved that. So the reason we were able to go as quickly to a completely new design was we already designed it once, quite some time ago. So our request tonight is, that we've been at this process for a long, long time. The reason we're giving you 2 alternatives is because, one, we think the primary alternative is a very beautiful building. It's a Mediterranean-style building. We think it's consistent within itself, and we just think we're using beautiful materials, and we think it's, again, going to be a beautiful building. As far as residential buildings downtown, again, we can't compare, the residential buildings to the Packard Foundation. We can't compare residential buildings to 467 First Street, the new office building. But as far as residential buildings downtown, we think it will be as beautiful as any building downtown. But tonight, we're going to present 2 options for your consideration. The first, we revised it as was mentioned by Zach. He went through everything. The standing seam, I wish Stevie had been here because the standing seam metal roof was Phoebe's idea. It actually does say in our plan set, the standing seam metal roof, and that is the dark roof that's in the SketchUp and is on all your elevations, is a dark standing seam metal roof. And then one of the biggest changes was we had 2 elevations that were done by the renderer that was in the front of the old package. And the problem was the renderer did not follow the architect, and the architect did not notice that the renderer did not follow his plans. So we've eliminated those 2 renderings because those were the ones that were inconsistent, and all the other plans were consistent. So the ones you have should be fully consistent. So again, we came up with a contemporary design, 7, 8 months ago, and then fortunately Jeff was willing to burn the midnight oil to come up with a contemporary design to present to you tonight also as an alternative for your consideration. So I'm going to turn this over to a real architect who can talk to you.
Thank you. Can you put the other PowerPoint up? I'll be brief as well. While he's doing that, as Jeff said, he asked us to take a look at the building and come up with a more contemporary alternative while maintaining most of the massing and the features of the building. I will note I didn't design the other building. I think it's a beautiful execution of a Mediterranean-style building with all the detailing and materials and everything that were used. So I'll get that out of the way. And yeah, okay, there we go. I know it's kind of, there's too many things to do here. And I'll probably have to just walk up and point to stuff. I'm not sure if the pointer works. Sorry, waiting for the other presentation, which is very brief, by the way.
All right. So we have the plans. I don't have another.
You don't have the PowerPoint I sent to you?
I got like 7 or 8, so I thought I took the most updated one.
Okay. Well, let's see if I can work with this then. Should be fine. So, I mean, basically, what we did is we took a look at a more contemporary version of the building, basically creating that with a change in materials, colors, and a little bit of roof pitch and a little bit of massing. The mixed materials is a large format stone material, sandstone, limestone type of color. We've got some wood feature elements, which, is there a pointer on this that works?
And now the printer doesn't work.
Okay. I'm going to walk up here then. Hopefully I can remember everything. So we came in with some nice stone corner shoulders, very strong feature elements which wrap around the building, created an entry element which hopefully we'll be able to see on the next slide. And then we sort of broke the massing up using a rhythm of the stone and the stucco and wood. We altered the roof to a standing seam metal roof, a little lighter version, included some metal awning features, trellis features and awnings with some wood accent, and created sort of a cable rail element there. Let's see what's on the next page. Or can I change it? I'm not sure I can change it. So again, on the front elevation, we tried to create a little bit stronger of an entry feature as well while we were reorganizing the building and the materials. So we created a strong stone entry feature with a little bit more of a contemporary awning and signage on it, and some light fixtures which we carried through up to the top, and again added the awnings and the trellises that had a little bit more modern feel to them, steel and metal. The next page. On the Lyle side, again, kind of carried those themes around with the strong stone shoulders, stone entry, kind of tried to pop that entry a little bit more. There's not quite as much room there. And then where there was an extra exit stair featured there, which was not really required, we created another element here to give us a little bit more symmetry around that entry feature that we created. And so we brought that wall out and the walls in between to try to get the rhythm, really kind of symmetrical and simple, a little bit more of a contemporary feel to it. You can go to the next slide. Keep one more. Again, so that's that view. And then, so on the rear, the biggest change, again, was the creation of sort of this balcony element and clean up and sort of modernize those tower features. The two-story balcony helps to break up that sort of large rear mass that was there along the alley. It adds a nice feel to it, brings it up to a little bit more of a modern aesthetic. We did, I know that on the previous version they changed the door out. For this version, we came in with a wood door, very similar to the building on the corner of First and San Antonio, and just to kind of give it that aesthetic with the wood accents on the corners and on the vertical elements there. And that's the two sort of rendered street views that you'd see coming down Lyell, looking at the alley side, and coming down First, looking at the Lyell side. And I think with that, I will be here for questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
The wood material and the stone material, just for comparison purposes, is it the same as 389? Because you're that's your project as well?
That's correct, and no, it's not.
No.
It is the large format stone, like a sandstone kind of, sandstone limestone format stone, but it
Okay.
is a different material.
Okay.
We are working through the material selections. I think if you all were to go in this direction, we would hope to work with staff to kind of fine tune those material selections. The wood, we're looking at something like a Kevany product, which is a treated pine. It becomes a very hard, high pressure, like an Ipe almost, and it maintains that dark color
Oh, okay.
in that version, so it would maintain that color there. And then a smooth stucco.
Okay. Just curious.
I guess, so a couple questions. The stone on the two versions are two different things, right? Is that,
Yes, sir.
okay. And I think that this is a rendering problem, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up and clarify. But if you could go back to the previous slide that shows the street rendering right there at the bottom picture. If you look at that corner, it's a pretty big wall behind the car. I mean, it's,
The stone.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think, if you look at the other renderings, that doesn't look like what it actually is going to be, but I just want to make sure that that's,
If you go back one, I think we can get one more. Yeah, you can see that it does kind of grow in height, but you're correct, it doesn't get quite that tall. It's kind of trying to sit the rendering into a photo.
yeah, no, I get
Cut
it.
it
So
off
it's
at the
distorted,
right-
right?
the
But
right
that's
spot.
not,
Yeah.
and then on this elevation, I'm assuming that the vents above the garage doors are necessary because we're going from a gated to solid.
Yes.
And is there a way of dressing that up or?
Yeah, I mean, I
doing
think we could
something
detail
on-
that with a, a little bit of a different feature, and potentially we could relocate or, work with those vents to make them a little less noticeable, or, bring them around the side potentially.
Okay. Great job pulling this all together. Is that it? Open up for public comment? All right, so if anyone would like to speak on this, please bring up a speaker card. I will read off I've only got 3 so far, and we'll go in this order. Paul, Eric, and John.
Good evening, I'm Paul, is it on? Good evening, I'm Paul Fertini. I'm the HOA representative for the building across the street at 396 First Street. I missed the last meeting, which I hear made all the changes, but am I correct? Is this going to be all small apartments like is drawn in there, small studio-like apartments? Is that correct?
The apartments are what's in the drawings.
It looks like they're all one bedrooms,
I don't think so.
except for one.
There's 8 two-bedrooms,
Yeah.
8 one-bedrooms.
8
4
two-bedrooms, 8
efficiencies.
one-bedrooms, okay. We had gotten the word back that there were a lot of studios in this the last time around. I don't know if that is correct or not, but the concern, if there were a lot of rentable units, was whether you would turn it into a hotel by it effectively becoming an Airbnb project. So that was the only real concern. We appreciate the change in the design. It looks like it's scaled back a bit and doesn't completely cover the view or dominate the features of the area. So we thank whoever for that, the designers, the committee. But if I'm mistaken, I'm sorry, but I was told that there were a lot of small units, and the concern would be whether there were CCNRs that would limit renters from changing in and out to 31 days, as are in our unit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eric Steinley?
First, in response to the previous speaker, the code actually does prevent moving without fewer than 30 days, so that's already against the law.
Yes.
I like this new design. I really think it's a step forward. And I'm really glad to see, I'll just hold it. Really glad to see that Cliff was involved because he's Mr. First Street now, I think, for us. And I think he's done a great job. I also like what I guess was the original alternate design, alternate number 2. Because, as you know, I'm design impaired, I asked my wife, who is not, and she went for number 2, but I had gone for number 1, so I'm going for this one, because I'm speaking. The one thing that sort of bothers me is the pointy little pediments. That's always been a feature that it seems to me could be rounded, or on a building this small and this low, I mean, it's not an enormous building, it does seem to me that doesn't add very much to the actual design, and it might be worth thinking about how to modify that in some way so that it wouldn't be quite so, we're coming up to the 4th of July, I'm going to say rockets, red glare. They sort of do seem like rockets set to blast off in that area, and that's the only thing I can think of that I would like to see possibly rethought. Maybe not, maybe it doesn't go, that's fine, but that would be the one thing that I would mention. So, thank you.
Thank you. And John Bear.
Good evening, I'm John Bear. Spent a lot of years on the Planning Commission. Doesn't make my opinion any better or worse than anybody else's, but hopefully it's somewhat informed. I'm going to urge you not to approve this project tonight as presented, and I've got 3 reasons not to. It's better, certainly better than the study session, better than what was presented to you before, but it's not good enough. Let me explain to you why. I would call this design Hampton Travel Lodge. There's the Hampton Inn, there's the Travel Lodge. It's a residential unit, it's not a hotel. We can do better, we should be doing better, and while what's across the street is terrible, hopefully the applicant, the community, and the Planning Commission has learned from what not to do. Second reason not to approve it as presented tonight. The drawings are as good as it gets. It's not going to be any better. It is likely to be worse when it's actually constructed. Why do I say that? Because that's exactly what happened to the building across the street, 396 First Street. Lastly, and part of the reason why it won't get better, is because it is highly unlikely that the applicant is actually going to build the building. I don't know for sure, but my guess is it's going to be sold to somebody else who's going to actually build it. So anything that isn't spelled out extremely clearly, and a landscape that hasn't been clearly specified, is going to be the minimal, not the maximum. And it's incumbent upon you to protect us and the community from another 396 First Street. And the applicant may have lots of excuses why and how that project happened. The reality is it happened, and it's unfortunate. Thank you very much.
Applicant.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. It is 4 two-bedrooms, 8 two-bedrooms, 8 one-bedroom, and 4 efficiencies. And that's part of the whole affordable by design. Obviously, we could have gone with fewer units and more expensive units, or we could have gone to 4 stories and larger units, but we chose not to do that because it is a housing type that's not available downtown for purchase. And I have adult children. I know some of you probably have adult children who would like to live in the town that they grew up in, and how are they going to enter to live in Los Altos? I will say that, of course, I haven't agreed with Mr. Bear probably ever while he was on planning commission or when I was on planning commission. I will say that he missed the presentation last time when we talked about the other projects I've done in town, such as the Colonnade, which I think people think is one of the nicest projects in town. 243rd Street is another example. 917 Fremont, which is next to the Bank of America building. Those are examples of other projects that I've done in town. And as you all are well aware, this project was, the 396 was done by Lennar during the recession. It was not done by me. But what you've seen is, I think, vastly improved, even though there were minor changes. I mean, the removal of the stairwell alone ended up being a huge benefit when it happened that would not have been perceived by me until it was gone. And then you could see how much better that elevation ended up being. Making the stone consistent all the way around, I think added a huge amount. And so I'm just asking you, the only reason I'm giving you two alternatives is because there was concern that the Mediterranean style that EDI chose was not enough of a style by at least one or more or two planning commissioners. And so we've got a contemporary style that's very consistent internally also. And so I wanted to give you two options. Again, the peer review process didn't work in this case, but I'm hoping that the planning commission process will work and we'll end up with one of these two. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to respond to that, I will say that, again, like that is why we don't just have, and hopefully you agree now, that we don't just have a peer review session and rely solely on that, but the body that's kind of up here to be the final say, because I know that was something we discussed last time as well. And so with that, I'll open it up to my fellow commissioners, and someone dying to start?
Okay, so I think the alternative design with the contemporary, is this on? With the contemporary finishes, I think is the most successful that I've seen of the project. I think that. Hello? Okay. So I think the alternative design, I think, is the most successful that I've seen. I just think that the massing and the repetition of the volumes lends itself more towards the modern finishes than the Mediterranean one that you had in the previous design. I'm glad the exterior staircase was removed. I'm even more glad that the entry feature is more distinct because I think it adds a lot to the First Street elevation. The only comment that I would have is that I think one reason that the First Street elevation works so well is because of the articulation of the facade, the parts that go out, the part that come in. And then on the Lyle Street elevation, you can see it on the plan, but you can see on the elevations it's very flat. And that part just concerns me once it's built, is that it's just going to look flat. So I don't know if you can show the elevation of it. So there's like the four elements, the vertical elements with the windows, and then there's the three elements in between. I don't know if there's a way to push the four out or push the three in between out, but I just think that that articulation is really going to improve that elevation. Because I do think the First Street is really successful. And then the rear elevation, that second and third story railing, awning, balcony element, I don't know if it works. One, because of the look of it, but also that's going to be an alleyway, and then the parking lot's going to be right there. I don't know if that necessarily has to be so open. I think maybe just more opaque or more solid for those railings, I think would just work better. But overall, I would be willing to recommend approval of the project. I just think that Lyle Street elevation just needs a little bit more articulation in that, on that side. Yep.
So I want to start with thanking the applicant for being open to revisiting some of the design. When I looked at the revisited design that was modeled off the original, I thought it was significantly better. And it wasn't that you made a lot of changes, but there's greater consistency and symmetry in the tweaks that you made to it. And just sort of, it simplified it a little, took some of the mismatched or pieces. But then, so I was already thought that was an improvement. And then and you changed some other components with the roofing and stuff. But then seeing this alternative design, it's like no question in my mind that this is a far superior product and will enhance the street significantly. And so my strong inclination is that I much prefer this design. I like the materials more. One of the issues that I still had with the first is that, and if you can pull up the B2.1A photo, is that it just still had like this sort of intensity and darkness with the lines of it almost feeling like, towers. And had that been the only, this one right here, it's just very, like the verticality is really emphasized, and by the dark sort of, to me it feels like towers, and I would have wanted to lighten that top floor if you were to stay with this design. But if you go back now to the other one, and particularly I think it's 002A, on the new design, just everything about this is lovelier. I mean, in terms of the entry and the colors and the lightness that you create on the top floor. I do think even the rear, I think that's interesting what's happening with the balconies, and it's a weird space, and I think that might make it, at least for the residents there, kind of a gathering area, or just they'll utilize that space. And one of the things that I'd like to see to sort of Lennar-proof this is when you do bring it to City Council, bring the materials. Let's confirm that they are really high quality. It looks good on paper. Let's make sure that the materials actually match the intention. And I would also suggest, there's a photo here, a perspective on the very front corner of First and Lyle, so 001A. If you look at the landscaping here, and then go to 001A, if you don't mind. Oh, that's interesting. So the hard copy that I'm looking at is different. It's that one. So I would suggest, I think that the landscaping can be elevated, and because this is our downtown and there's going to be a lot of pedestrians, sort of experiencing primarily that space, I like the variety and the color and diversity of plants in this design. Much better than in the others. So I would say those are the two pieces that I'd like to see really fleshed out for City Council. And I'm very supportive of this alternative design.
Okay, I agree with what's been said. This contemporary, certainly personally I like better, but I think it really reflects better the direction the town is going. This doesn't remind me so much of a hotel as it does actually remind me of the nice residential property on San Antonio Road where the bottom is Stanford Health and there's other units in there. It just sort of has the feel of some of that. So to me, this could be a very successful style on First Street. And we did discuss about materials and everything last week, and last meeting. So I think staff has heard that message loud and clear. I agree that the title sheet that we have that reflects the bulb out, that I think staff, you had recommended at one point, but it's not carried through in all the drawings. But what I see on that title sheet with the bulb out and the landscaping, the low seat wall, that is infinitely more attractive, as Ronit was saying, than what looks like to be a bunch of grasses or rushes or whatever. It's not so interesting. So I would like to see the title sheet that we have that's reflected on that poster, that landscaping, that type of plan continue through with the application to council. I also want to thank you for listening and accommodating, because I know that was painful for you for a variety of reasons, particularly that night. And I think, so I was going to just point out that I think the garage door in this plan looks beautiful. It should still accomplish the security function and is much more attractive than a metal door. So as long as that sort of has the same efficiency for parking access and all that, then I think that makes sense. But it has to be able to roll up and let people get in and out in sufficient time frame, and I don't think we've looked at any of that information. But I think this is dramatically improved.
Thank you. I want to absolutely thank the applicant for taking another pass at this project. I think there were a lot of comments made during the last session that was clearly taken to heart and taken seriously. And I think the proposed alternate design is much more cohesive. And again, it's less about styles. It's more about being cohesive, and it's more, to me, in general, in appearance, much lighter. And I think that's in keeping with the sort of the mass that's being proposed. A lightness really helps, I think, to break things down, break down the scale, and make it, in a way, much more human. So I think the material palette that you've chosen here, it hangs together in a very cohesive way. So I think congratulations for that. I think that's a job really well done. I do agree with some of my fellow commissioners here regarding Lyle Street. I think that's the least successful elevation, and that I think has to do with, it can be improved with some very minor push and pull of the planes, especially to me the sort of the solid vertical wood bands. Potentially that plane could be pushed in to give a little bit more prominence to the vertical elements. I think that would help to give a little bit more depth to that elevation. I think the real elevation is successful. I think it's I like the fact that it is different, and it's addressing a very different condition towards the rear. I do, however, think that the sort of the exhaust grill on the stone could be improved. There's something nice about your previous scheme where that stone wall read through as a solid wall. I think there's something simpler and just a little bit more richer about that solution. So if there could be some learnings from that can be applied to this particular alternate rendition, then I think you'll have a great project altogether. I do like the landscaping, and I think that's it's probably a much better rendering, right? A much better sort of considered rendering. And I'm sure in terms of the landscaping, the other solution, could have a similar rendering once completed. But I think, again, as a kind of composition, it really holds together. I think it probably goes without saying that the success of the project ultimately will be in the way that these materials come together and how all these elements are detailed. I think that's where it's really going to sing, or it's going to fall apart. So I trust that there'll be enough attention paid to the detailing to really make this an incredible project. Thank you.
Can I just add one more thing? No, you only have one thing left. No. So I actually want to point out that at the moment outside those balcony doors, it's true there's a parking lot, but there's also the beautiful, at the moment, vacant Packard grassland type thing. I don't know how long that will be there. Uh-oh, they have a funny look on their faces. But anyway, there is actually a kind of a beautiful view out there at the moment, part of it, so just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, but I will add that even if it is a parking lot, it's a great amenity for tenants, and they're smaller units, and so we often emphasize like having those outdoor spaces. So I'm perfectly fine with that treatment. Again, really want to thank you for this project and for persevering, and I think we are going to end up with something far better than what we started with. Hopefully you would agree. Just a couple of minor things from my perspective. I really do feel very strongly about those grills over the garage door. I think it really cheapens the building, and if we got to find a solution for that, because it's really going to be an eyesore. Perfect. And then if there's a way to address, so I think what you guys have done with Lyle and the removal of that street and emphasizing that entrance, the stair rails just look really cheap. And so if there's a way of it just kind of looks like painted pipe. I don't know quite how to describe it, but there's going to be a lot of people just walking past that, and it's going to be pretty prominent. So I think dressing that up, I'd also like to point out. And then if you look at the renderings, kind of the first sheet, which is 001A, that corner shot with the bulb out, if you look at the stonework on the lower levels, it's got texture to it. And then if you look at the other ones, it looks more of like a flat tile. For me, like that texture really does a lot to break up the flatness of all of the stucco up above, and that we've seen that that texture, that stonework work well on other buildings in town, especially up against, or with the wood. So I would encourage you to look at that, and my vote would be towards that rendering as opposed to what looks like more just like limestone tile. But other than that, again, very supportive of the project. I think it's going to be a great project, and we trust that you guys are going to deliver what we're seeing today. So thank you. Does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll move to approve the, how do we do it? Recommend approval of, I have it in front of me. The design with I think, is there a preference among us for the contemporary design? That's my motion.
We're approving the actual,
I don't have it in front of me, but it's, the language is.
the artifact.
It's, you would be approving the design review and subdivision application, subject to the findings and conditions listed in the draft resolution.
What he said. And basing it, I think we all agreed that we like this title page the best with including some of the details shown on the other, and there were comments specifically around the vents and the potentially the articulation on the Lyle side or whatever, but you heard all that, so, yeah. Okay, so that's the motion.
I'll second it.
So Sally, you made the motion and Ronit seconded.
Did I make the motion? Okay.
Sure.
Zach made the motion.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Congratulations. Okay, and item number 4, the public hearing. amendment to the R3-4.5 multiple family district.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Steve Golden, Senior Planner. The item before you is a request to consider an ordinance to amend the R3 4.5 multiple family district to adopt site development standards for the district, to establish a design review process for additions and exterior modifications, and to update other provisions of the district regulations consistent with other residential zoning districts. I'll just give a kind of a brief overview of sort of where we're at given the various study sessions. So as you already know, the city has one R3 4.5 zoning district, which is on the north side of Homestead, and it consists of the lots that primarily front onto Stevens Place and Marshall Court. And there's 48 lots. They're all duplex type units, the majority of which are single story. There are 4 lots to the eastern portion of this area, which is also called Marshall Meadows, which those 4 lots which are 2-story, but they're more consistently that 1-story duplex unit. If you look at the aerial, you'll kind of see that these units that were built 1961, most of them were built then. They were pretty sort of modular units that are fairly consistent in the square footage and area of units and garages. So just a couple pictures. Most of the exterior structures have not changed since they were built. Minor modifications such as windows and interiors have been updated, but the exteriors resemble that 1961 style and materials. So the commission did have 2 prior study sessions on the zoning district amendments. First in September of 2018 and a second one in February of 2019. Just a quick summary that the commission gave direction to staff to kind of explore with the zoning district amendments was you kind of determined that you wanted to have development standards that do not create non-conforming structures. You talked about respecting the surrounding single-family properties, primarily to the north and the west of this Marshall Meadows area. There was a discussion on second-story additions or second stories, and I don't think there was any final decision made about that, but there was discussion about the fact that the city does have a 1-story overlay district that could be established by the residents. And then you requested staff to provide site plan examples of the proposed setbacks and also some information with regards to the development potential of parcels. So since then, we looked at 8 lots to the very west side of the district. We thought that these were a good examples of the interaction and relationship of both Homestead Road and also the single-family lots to the north and the west to kind of study those relationships and the setbacks that we were proposing and kind of analyzing. So we asked the applicant to provide some information since they had submitted the site plan to begin with. They kind of superimposed the proposed setbacks that we had suggested previously, which were 20 feet on the all lot lines abutting Stevens Place and Marshall Court, and then also a 20-foot setback to all R110 districts. And then within the district itself, having 5-foot first story setbacks and 10-foot second story setbacks. So they provided that information for these 8 lots. Just wanted to remind you that the footprints that you see on this plan are not, potentially not 100% accurate. It's just based on aerial photos. So where you see where there might be conflicts with these setbacks, there may not. It's maybe a little bit questionable. And so we did find that based on these 8 lots, with the proposed setbacks, 6 of those 8 lots would potentially create a non-conforming situation with the setbacks. But we are still suggesting our proposed setbacks because we're trying to create sort of orderly and consistent development patterns within this district and the relationship to the surrounding areas. We think that the proposed setbacks would provide uniform and adequate yard spaces and adequate separation of structures. And we believe if you move to try to adopt standards that create no non-conforming situations, you potentially won't achieve the desired effect that we're trying to with the setbacks. So with that, we also provided some information with regards to the development potential. There's a lot of numbers up there, so it's in the staff report. Hopefully you had a chance to take a look at that. But just kind of giving you an example that with a 40% FAR, if you were to recommend establishing that 40% FAR, that would result in approximately 3,340 foot to 3,550 square foot building, not including the garage. And this represents 1,600 to about a 1,700 or 1,800 square foot unit size. Just to give you perspective as far as what we're seeing multifamily development in the downtown and on El Camino, just took 3 projects in the downtown and 1 project on El Camino. The average for a 2-bedroom is about 1,200 to 1,400 square feet. Average for a 3-bedroom is 1,600 to 2,000 square feet or larger. So with a 40% FAR, the resulting unit size is kind of within that range that we're seeing with the newer multifamily projects. So we think that that is also a reasonable approach to this district. So the draft ordinance is in the staff report, is provided as attachment A. We haven't made any significant changes to the code amendment since the February study session, but we did make some minor changes with regards to the treatment of non-conforming structures, and also we removed accessory dwelling units or ADUs from as a permitted use because it doesn't really apply in this district where you have duplex units. And so, yeah, that pretty much concludes what I wanted to present to you. You do have a number of speakers. Just wanted to remind the speakers if you can grab the mic and hold it close to your mouth so we get all the audio. So with that, staff does recommend that you recommend to the City Council to make the findings pursuant to Los Altos Municipal Code Section 1486.060 and adopt the amendments to the zoning code chapter for the R3 4.5 multiple family district, and I can take any questions you might have.
I'm actually going to go first, not necessarily a question, but just a comment, which is that I don't think that the mandate wasn't to create to have everything 100% conform, but to minimize the variances, because I think unless we drew it with a crayon, we wouldn't get there, and I just don't want anyone to think that we're that crazy to think that we could do that. So I just wanted to clarify that.
And also just to tell you that we did have some late correspondence. We did email and provide you at your table here tonight, so it's part of the record.
Perfect. Any other questions?
So thank you, Steve. I think a lot of work went into this. I appreciate that. One question is what, on the sample lot layouts, what are those shaded areas supposed to be representing?
So those areas represent the driveways. We recommended that the applicant
Okay.
provide that, so just could kind of see the area that's already taken up by driveways.
I see. Okay.
There are some lines in there which are right-of-way easements and also
Right.
public utility easements, but try not to focus on those too much because they're throughout the whole project.
Okay, and then the other question has to do with, so you removed the ADU as a permitted use in this district.
Correct.
Correct, which I think makes sense given the nature of the district. But we do allow accessory structures, and now I'm going to turn this direction, and the state allows accessory structures to be converted into ADUs. So Zach looks like he's got you know where I'm going with that question then.
The state law focuses on single-family uses in single-family districts and non-existing single-family uses in multifamily districts, but it doesn't have that same requirement for multifamily uses. So that's why we removed ADUs, because it only applies, we included it in multifamily districts because you have a handful of non-conforming single-family uses within those districts, and you could do an ADU on those lots. So that's kind of the line, is this is not a single-family use, so it isn't treated the same way.
And then is it clear enough that, so again, there is accessory structure language in here, or does it, if someone came in and had one of these and they had an accessory structure and wanted to turn it into an ADU, the ordinance just omits language about it? Should it explicitly state, and maybe that's more of a discussion item, but.
I mean, I think the general practice is each zone district has its list of permitted and conditional uses, and if it's not listed, it's not permitted or
Okay.
it's not a conditional use.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so we'll go with, turn it over for public comment. Again, if you would like to speak on this item.
There's actually an applicant presentation.
Oh, sorry.
And get the-
Sorry about that. So applicant presentation, please.
Give me 1 second here.
I forget that you actually had to go through and take charge on the lead on here.
Yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to discuss. Which one? Okay, thanks. To come before you again. It's been we're the third time around, so I think you probably pretty much know what we're talking about. Just quickly, this was a subdivision that was made in 1961, subdivided into 48 lots, and there was the code that they kind of forgot to do a couple of things back then, and so it's been sitting ever since. So we came along and sort of kicked the ball. The can didn't get kicked down anymore. We decided to try and get it fixed. I don't think there's been any controversy that we ought to get a complete code so we can, go do stuff. The question has really been around whether what the setback should be and whether it should be single or two-story. So let me just, to discuss that a little bit. I know there's been some discussion about how much support we have. It's hard to get people to come to a meeting like this if their owners are in Arizona or Florida or some other place, Hawaii. So these are the people who responded to our first letter that we sent out that said, yeah, they would like to see a code amendment done. That's 21 out of 48 unsolicited, just a letter that came in the mail from us. We think that's pretty phenomenal. There was a discussion last time about the single-story overlay, and that there wasn't much support for it, and there was some support against it. So again, half the property owners are not occupants, and so we had sent a letter to supportive owners and asking if they would sign a letter stating they would vote against a single-story overlay. So that was a very specific request, and we got 10 signed letters back, and you have 9 of them in your package, and I didn't sign one. I'm on that camp. So that's a pretty good response. So a 2/3 supermajority, it's a pretty supportive that we would not like a single-story overlay in the neighborhood. So these are the neighbors that actually sent us back letters that you have in your packages. I think we mentioned last time that there were 4 Marshall Meadow 2 stories that were built originally, but we said there were only 3 2 stories on the 14 adjacent R110s, and that's incorrect. There are actually 4. Went back around and looked at them again. So there are actually 4 adjoining 2-story R110s that actually abut us. And it's just kind of the support that, fair is fair, I think. In the setback, as Steve said, there are aerial shots, so it's a little hard to get the exact placement, but we do have ground truth on 3 of them, and they're pretty close on the 3 we have. And our unit, our next door neighbor's unit, would all be non-conforming, on both sides of us would be non-conforming based on a 20-foot. So 15-foot would, the vast majority of them would be conforming. So that's just something to think about, that if it was a 15-foot setback. You'll note that backyard, side yard gets a little confusing if you look at, can I go back with the other button? Yeah. If you look, and don't have a pointer, so I'll come over here. These are flag lots here. And if you look at the flag lots, they, generally speaking, work all the way across, but that is their side yard. Their front of the house is here. This is the front, this is the back. So you have to redefine front and back for those lots, and it's not completely clear how that would be done. In our case, the R1 over here, this is our unit. The R1 here comes within 5 feet of us at that corner, because they have their address off of Homestead, and their eave is 2 feet beyond that, and so they're about 3 feet from our lot line. So there are exceptions because of the strange nature of the flag lots. But in general, that's a minor, to me, somewhat of a minor point. I think the important thing is to get a code amendment through so we can get, we can update the neighborhood, in our case specifically, so we can start thinking about remodeling our unit. And so I think I would urge you to approve this on to the City Council so we can go to the next step. I'll take any questions.
I've got one. You grouped together the front and rear setbacks at the 20-foot with 90% being non-conforming. At
Yes.
20 feet.
Yeah.
Do you have the breakdown between front and back?
No, I do not. I know that, for instance, our lot, the front, is non-conforming on our unit and non-conforming on the A side is non-conforming in the front and the B is non-conforming in the back. I know our next door neighbors is non-conforming in the back. The neighbor to our left on the corner of the cul-de-sac is non-conforming in the front. So, I mean, we didn't really go do that, but certainly there are non-conformings in the front as well as the back.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, so with that, we'll move to public comment. I've only got 3 speaker cards so far, so we'll go in this order. Need to, Patnani, followed by Michelle Machado, and Owen Halliday.
Hi, I'm Neetu Fatnani. We bought our unit in 2017, so we are relatively new to the neighborhood. And we support the 2-story overlay, and we are against the 1-story. So that's our position. Last time, I remember one of the committee members said, we heard more no's than yes. And I want to address that with you before we go and discuss anything else. If everybody in R1 could vote whether we can have 2-story or a 1-story, while they all could have a 2-story, do you think that's fair? I don't think so. I don't think everybody in R1 who can have a 2nd story should stop us from having a 2nd story. That's number one in terms of fairness. So I feel that the residents should have more of a say on the path that we should take. Of course, everybody has a voice, but I mean, there should be a weightage assigned to who is expressing their view for or against. That's the thing I would urge you to focus on. When it comes to the residents, there was one lady who came and said she doesn't want a 2-story, and she has a single-family home, the only single-family home in our R3 district. So if you are going to give weightage to that, then would you allow me to have a single-family home so that I can raise my family and have the room I need? So if I already had a single-family home, I'm okay if you don't allow me to have a 2-story overlay. There are 4 owners who already have a 2-story. If they could vote a no on the proposal while we all are not allowed to have a 2-story, how is that fair? So when you count yes and no's, I would urge you to be fair, to take into consideration whose vote it is and what are their concerns. In terms of any building, I'm sure, that comes in front of you, there are people who say no because of nuisance. Like, it's going to be a short-term disturbance. It's going to disrupt our lifestyle. And there might be tenants who might not want the disturbance. They might not want to vacate while somebody is building their square footage. So instead of the short-term thinking of not having nuisance, weigh in on the long term. So that's my thing. I am for the proposal. I would urge you to be fair and think of a solution that's fair to all of us.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Michelle Machado? Machado.
Sorry, I'm not related to Manny Machado.
Okay.
So it's a little bit different. I just have a concern.
Excuse me one
about-
second. Zach, that's a timer for 3 minutes, or is that a warning? Okay.
Sorry. As you can tell, I'm really nervous. I have a concern about making all the properties conform if, they were to want to remodel. I'm concerned about that requirement devaluing people's properties and putting an undue burden on them to take care of a mistake that was really made many, many years ago and isn't our own creation. But it's going to cause a problem when people go to sell these homes because you got to disclose it. and it's going to put buyers off, and it is going to devalue everybody's property if you put this into the code that you have to make it then conform. Because there's just so many things that don't conform. It's people are just going to throw their hands up in the air and say, this isn't worth it to me, I'm not buying this. So I'm concerned about that. So, and that's it. Do you want it right here? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Owen Halliday. And then we have a final speaker, Terry Wiss.
Good evening, Owen Halliday. I happen to be we're a primary tenant in the 467 First Street, so I just wanted to say we look forward to the new building coming just a few doors down. I think he's done a great job, and I think that's, anyway, side note. On this property, this area, I would just say I'm against single-story overlays. I think the more limitations we have for homeowners, thinking going back to sort of leaving things the way they were isn't the way to move forward. I like what you're doing with downtown. I like the fact that we might be able to allow second stories here. And I think retroactively creating a situation where you have a huge number of non-conforming properties is just not a good idea. It just throws everybody kind of into a tizzy and they don't know what to do. So I think if there were a way that you could create the fewest number of non-conforming properties out the gate, that would be preferred.
Thank you. We got one more speaker after that, Nitin Panjwari.
Hi, I'm Terry Wiss. I'm actually one of the single-family homes that is immediately adjacent to this. And I think you heard a lot from us in the last couple of meetings. But just to reiterate, I think especially if you're looking at granting like the second stories and everything, then these dwellings are really close to the property lines already. And then if you're increasing that, I did have some concerns about the 40%. I don't know how easy it is to bring that back up. But when you look at the square footages on that, that's way bigger than my house is. So I realize that that's the maximum amount. But one of the things that had been brought up that nobody has addressed at all today is a lot of us have talked about that one of the biggest concerns is the density. And if you're making each unit bigger, then the density is going to be there. And already I urge you to come either in the morning or the afternoon commute and see how backed up Homestead is. It's a zoo getting in and out of there. And that's one of the issues that I haven't heard raised again tonight.
Can you show the neighborhood? You mentioned you're a neighboring.
Yeah, you want to know
property.
which one I am?
I was.
I'll
hoping
show you
could
the
just
exact
point out
house.
where you're at.
Yes.
And then can you also can you?
That's
are
my
you-
house right there.
Are you 1 or 2 stories there?
1. Yeah, the existing 2 stories in what we're talking about are the ones that back up to the creek, and that's why they have been different, because there's not anybody behind them that they're shadowing. We also had brought up the issues before about that the houses behind as you go down the street,
Go down.
the ones in Cynthia, yeah,
Got it.
our side goes much further down, much quicker.
The second question I have is house number 2 right next to yours. Is that 1 or 2 story?
1.
Okay.
Okay, so the final speaker card that I have is Nitin Panjwari. Hopefully I got that name right.
Yeah, hi guys. I'm Nitin. So I will strongly support the 15 feet. I think if we create 90% 80% non-conforming right now, it's going to be a more problem down the road. So we should also consider that. The other fact is we should also look at the neighboring districts. For example, R1. Many of those units are also not 15 feet. In fact, they feel like 5 to 6 feet. So they are already like significantly non-conforming even to the 6 units that Steve had shown in the picture. So I will recommend that we should also consider the offset in the neighboring district. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no more speakers, we'll close public comment and move on to discussion.
Yeah. So I'm, just so impressed with the applicant for having the stamina and patience to get this through. I mean, I think what started as like a desire to make some modest changes to your property resulted in you taking on what I think will be the transformation of this area. And it's kind of crazy to me still that for almost 60 years there was a total absence of development standards, and this area was just like frozen, and has really not changed since it was built. So I'm entirely supportive of the recommended changes. I'm not surprised that once the conversation went deeper, that the single-story overlay desire was not going to, it appears that it clearly will not get the support that it will need. I also agree that the people who are going to be affected by it, and particularly owning those properties, are the ones that have the vote in it. And I do agree with your sentiment that fair is fair, because it's true that all the other areas, when they do get remodeled, can go up. I'm comfortable with the 40% FAR. And in terms of the setback, I'm also comfortable with setting it at 20 feet and getting us to 70-80% conformity. I think that that's actually probably really common in Los Altos. If we look at homes that were built in the 60s, I think many of them would probably also be in that 70-80% range of conformity when they come to remodel. And I think the opportunity here is when those decisions are made, is still pretty significant. And so what I would say is, I think the setback at 20 feet is like a good conservative first stance for the commission to make, but at the same time, I would say that staff and applicants shouldn't feel like they can't come forward with variance requests, that this is like a standard that has been in place for 50 years. It's different than standards that have been in place for 50 years and we've set it, I don't want to set it and forget it. We really should revisit this at an opportunity. So I'm totally open to having someone come back in the near future, even though we've said 20 feet, with something that is less, and explain to us why maybe this isn't the right number and we got it wrong. So I think it's a good placeholder. But there's really nothing magical to me about that number, and it may be imperfect. And then in terms of a comment that one of the speakers said about how the fact that there will be some non-conforming properties, may devalue the property, I think that's really balanced by the opportunities that the potential buyer will see in terms of gaining square footage. So it, in my mind, balances itself out. And I'm excited to see what, happens in this neighborhood. I think you've just sort of turned a switch, and we'll see how it transforms it slowly, as I imagine it will.
Okay, so one thing that hasn't come up, and I didn't see in the draft ordinance either, is about basements. And I think basements are a mechanism available to this zone too, presumably, with the same type of criteria in the R110 district.
Yes, so basements are not counted towards floor area, just like R1 districts, correct?
But there was no, so what I did was I printed out the R110 guidelines and compared it to the analogy you were working here to come up with these draft guidelines. And I did see that omission, so I think, or it wasn't included because it's just, you're not addressing maybe the whole thing, all the wording, but go ahead, Zach, you look like you have.
I think probably if that's something you want to see explicitly included, you should reference it, because in the R1 there is a basement section. So
Yes, exactly.
because you need to accommodate light wells and other elements. So as drafted, it doesn't speak to them, but I think it would functionally preclude them. So if you want to allow those, you should probably include that as part of your motion, and then we can include language to ensure there's no confusion.
So that's then a different point. You're saying your intention was to preclude basements from this zone? Is that the intent?
I think we didn't really explore that option, and so really the code doesn't speak to it. But if they are going to be allowed, we would want to include language similar
Right,
to the R1 to make sure that they're accommodated for.
Okay, because I think basements are a less obtrusive way to gain living footage, and so I'm not sure why we would exclude a basement when we even allow basements in accessory dwelling units. So I don't know why we would exclude them here. So that was maybe a question rather than part of the discussion point, but it kind of occurred to me listening to all these things. So I do support using, as I said before, the R110 as an analogy. When I went through the R110 side by side with the draft, though, I noticed a number of things. So in R110, sorry, this is just something I printed out, so it's not in the packet, but in R110 it talks about maximum coverage, as you do in this, and it talks about 35% of the area of a site where the height of a one-story development does not exceed 20 feet. Then it talks about the scenario where you have the height of a one-story development exceeds 20 feet, or there's two-story development, it knocks down that maximum lot coverage to 30%. To me, the draft that we're looking at here goes up to 40% and does not actually knock back if one were to add a second story. I think there's a lot of value to doing that if we want to keep in the second story allowance, because when you don't knock it back, you're then allowing 40% regardless of whether there is or isn't a second story. In addition, we've given setback concessions as well. So if you actually look at the density of development, and I think there's been different definitions of density used in some of the comments here, but I'm talking about density of coverage or development on the site. If you give that increased FAR, you give decreased setbacks, and you don't require a decrease in the FAR when going up to a second story, you're getting a really dense square footage on that lot relative to what we allow in the R110. So I don't actually like that inconsistency. The other inconsistency in the R110 is that flag lots are not allowed. At this point, it's probably been 15, 20 years, whenever it was changed. We don't allow two-story developments on flag lots. So if you talk about what's fair, then only one-story houses are allowed on flag lots in R110. So why is it then fair to allow two-story developments on the flag lots, which half of these lots are in this neighborhood? So I'm kind of struck with that inconsistency too. I would prefer to see a lesser lot coverage, but include basement language. I don't really see any reason to preclude basements in this zone. Although I would really like to be able to support two-story developments, using R110 as the analogy, then I don't see how we can then consistently support two stories on the flag lots. That then sets up an immediate inequity between the front lots and the back lots. I recognize that, but I just don't see how it fits with the intention of our zoning in R110, then how it could fit in this zone. I think we heard some talk about density, I think the people, the comments were actually referring to person densities. I don't agree that necessarily bigger homes increase densities. It's still one family per unit, and you're not going to reproduce more just because you have a bigger living room, or at least I wouldn't. I can't speak to other people's habits, but so I don't think that density concern is. And I do want to clarify, actually, I think there were comments last time about, people in the residences, single-family residents behind didn't want 2 stories because, these were higher up, whatever. None of that to me is the relevant point. Because I've yet to hear someone come and say, oh, I really support well, actually some people do, come and say, I support my neighbor's 2-story. But you would have a right in an R110 area that's not a single-story overlay and not a flag lot to build a 2-story. I think the talk about single-story overlay kind of got misinterpreted because that was looked at as a tactic to address whether or not this area should have 2 stories or not. And it really wasn't addressing what I'm talking about, which is the inequity or the lack of consistency in what our zoning does for our single-family residences in R110 versus this. So that's what I'm focused on, not bigger houses or people or what the other neighbors think is appropriate. So I don't know if I really need to go any further, but you can see that I've raised, I have actually a lot of questions about this and would not be able to support it as is tonight without some of the things I've brought up being addressed.
Thank you. I'm in support of what is being presented here in this proposed amendment. I'm actually just baffled by the fact that you have a resident raising this issue after so many years. It's a little bit beyond my comprehension how the situation has happened and taken so long to address. But I think there needs to be a zoning plan in place here for this neighborhood and for these residents. I don't think, again, my fellow commissioners here have brought up some excellent points. I think the parity between the R1-10 districts does make sense as a point of departure. However, I think this area, the nature of this area, the scale of this area is different, and it is slightly unique. So again, I think the percentage of FAR could be debated, whether it's 40 or it's again, to reach a certain level of parity, it remains at 35. I don't really have any strong position on that. I think it can work both ways. And I don't really think the setback and the fact that a lot of the properties are will be non-conforming is particularly an issue. I think as each resident or properties start their development, they will need to address those specific issues as they surface, and hopefully the city will accommodate or take seriously these considerations for variances. Thank you.
I had a quick question. The flag lot that Commissioner Meadows brought up, what was the rationale for the single or the 2-story with no flag lot? Or not having, not having 2 stories for flag lots?
Sure. Just to clarify, we wouldn't consider these flag lots because they don't have a corridor to the street, but nonetheless, maybe they function as flag lots. But the reality is with those rear portion lots, they all have yard relationships, I'll call them rear yard relationships to the single-family lots to the west and to the north, or to Homestead. And so with R110, I think that the city adopted that one-story restriction because of the awkward relationships that sometimes flag lots can have to the yard relationships, and where you have side on rears and various relationships. So you wouldn't have the situation with these particular lots. Also, just to clarify, with the lot lines abutting the R110 district or Homestead, the proposed amendment would have a 20-foot first story setback and a 25-foot second story setback. So there is more relief with that second story. So that's primarily why we didn't look at these particular, I'll put my hands up quotes, of flag lot types to be the same as a typical R1 or what can occur with R1 flag lots. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so basically, I would be supportive of what staff has recommended. I think, first of all, what they provided was really helpful. So that was really nice to have. I think two things jumped out at me when I saw the sample set for the 8 lots. I think a second story definitely has to be allowed, in my opinion, because for a few of these lots, it probably wouldn't be possible to add much without the second story. So, or if it's limited to 1 story. So I think second story would be nice. And then the 40% FAR, to me, it makes more sense than the 35. If we're thinking of this area as a duplex zone, which is a higher zoning, then I think 40% is more logical. And then the setbacks, I think that the setbacks are definitely something that need to be looked at. But again, I think that this map that's provided, and also from what the neighbors have measured themselves, they're not super accurate. I think once a survey is done, then we can really see. I mean, I've had projects where I thought it was 10 and it ended up being more. So I think that we just have to wait and see what the actual setbacks are and which ones really are not conforming when that happens. And then, yeah, I had a question if the design review for these projects, if something does get proposed, if there's going to be some type of extra design review, or is it just the same process?
So what's in the amendment before you would adopt the same design review process and design reviewed findings that R1 or single family development requires, which if it's under 20 feet or if it's just 1 story or under 20 feet, it's an administrative review. Staff reviews it. It does go through, an exhaustive review still with staff, and we make the same findings in the code. And then over 20 feet or 2 stories goes to the Design Review Commission, which is a public hearing. So there is opportunity for each of these projects for neighbor input and
yeah. Okay. So yeah, I support everything that's in here.
Great. So, Excel, you bring up some great points. When I look at it, I agree with staff that it doesn't really feel like flag lots because it was designed this way, and so that for me is not as much of a concern. But I think your point on the basement is well taken. And can we go to the slide with the FAR at 40 versus 35? I think for me, kind of the biggest issue is this one, which is the allowable FAR. Because when we look at, you know, at 40% on a 10,000 square foot lot, I mean, we're talking about 4,300 square feet, and most of what I've heard from the applicant and from everyone that's spoken is not really talking about increasing so much the intensity, I'd say, as much as it is just setting some standards whereby they can know what the rules are so that they can make improvements. And so for me, at least, I feel like the 35% FAR would feel like a better kind of density for these lots. And so I would, and especially if we can add the language about basements, and I think you can get the right square footage and have the right amount of kind of green space and building and ratio. And I think it just would feel like a better development and a better neighborhood. And so I'm more in favor of the 35% versus the 40. And then my last point was the issue around, you know, whether 90% of it is non-conforming. I know you've done a lot of work on it, and we put a lot of burden on the applicant to get to this point, but the fact is, like, no one really knows, right? We have no idea, it seems like, and it's kind of incumbent on, I think, the city to really figure out, like, if that were the case or not. But irrespective of that, it's really up to this body to kind of come up with development standards, really, that are appropriate, and that everyone kind of can then understand, you know, again, what the rules are and what they can do. And so by instituting the 20 feet, it doesn't preclude anyone from, again, doing a full remodel of their home and staying within the confines of the existing structure. But if you are going to structurally alter more than 50% of your home, to me, that feels like a big enough undertaking that you should have to conform to development standards that are pretty, I think, reasonable and fair, and articulate some of the other development standards throughout the town. So I would also be supportive of the setbacks that have been outlined by staff.
Is it possible, if we do want to do the 35, would it be possible to say that the minimum is 35? If anything is over 35, then it triggers a planning commission not to exceed 40, but have like a range? That way we don't really deny over 35, but we still keep it open. Does that make sense?
So once this code is adopted, projects in this zone district wouldn't come back before planning commission, because as structured, a variance or design review would go before the design review commission, commensurate with how single family are treated.
Oh, okay.
So there could be some challenges in the logistics of that. I think it's a much easier application if there's a defined FAR rather than a range.
Okay.
So one point, and I realize I'm in the minority, I left out an important point on the R110, is that, so let me just repeat the first parts briefly. So 35% applies to a one-story development on our 110 lot that does not exceed 20 feet. And either a one-story that exceeds 20 feet or a two-story has a 30% coverage allowable. And then I didn't say this last part, but on sites where the lot coverage exceeds 30%, two-story structures shall not be allowed. So again, if you look for consistency, whether it's the 40% or the 35%, we're actually not even defining FAR where we do in R110 at what level you can't add a second story. So again, that if we're talking about parity and consistency, I'm not seeing that in this draft.
Just, just a quick note, and I appreciate your comments with regards to the coverage. Okay, so with regards to floor area, that is, so the definition includes all enclosed structures over 6 feet in height. For coverage, it includes both enclosed and unenclosed structures. So you might have a shade trellis that counts towards lot coverage, but not floor area. So to your point, I think staff would agree with the parity, if you want to use that word, to the R1 districts by looking at the lot coverage and saying for those structures that are over a certain height or the second story, to look at a reduction of 5% in the lot coverage similar to the R1 district, so you don't have the intensity that you would with just a straight up 40%. So
right.
I would agree with that point.
Okay.
And your point is well taken with regards to basements. It
Okay.
was, in looking at this district too, we're so focused on what is existing, and you don't have the ability in this district for a lot of extra structures and so forth. So you kind of get bogged down in what it is and not maybe what it could be. So.
And that was coverage I was reading from that last bit about.
Correct.
So, but
Yeah.
okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, because I would say from just an FAR perspective, I mean, and didn't necessarily think it was parity with the R1, but really it was sort of as a baseline, right? But by definition, I mean, this district is more intense.
Right. And so I wasn't looking for 30% and 35% and whatever. I was looking for the principle of stepping down if you're allowing a second story in the intensity. I think that's actually the good word to describe it. And I wasn't seeing that stepping back at all. So
if we're gonna go to a vote, it doesn't. I'm still supportive of the 40%. It doesn't look like there's enough of us. So I'd like that idea that you're proposing of sort of the 40-35 analysis. And
Okay.
then
That wasn't a question, was it?
no, but I kind of want to understand a little bit better the timing of moving this forward, because it sort of feels to me like we've made the applicant kind of work too hard and wait too long. And it feels like it's really, the city's obligation to have development standards in place for neighborhoods. And so it feels like we really need to have that, the initiative, be on the city, and the speed be, I don't know. I want to see this move forward, and I don't have a sense of sort of how much longer this will go on.
Well, once you make a recommendation, then staff would work with the city clerk on getting it onto a council agenda. It could be approved in one meeting, but that's up to the city council. That would be a first reading. You have to have a second reading for an ordinance, and then it's effective essentially 30 days after the second reading. So it's a process, but your recommendation would continue that process. I don't know if you have 100% agreement, but somebody could motion something and make it be so and move it forward.
I get it, but I'm not understanding why this is a process that seems to be directed by the applicant, like it's coming forward as an applicant's request to, you know, put this forward as opposed to like the city's obligation to put development standards in place for this neighborhood. Like, why is he still the one that has to like be, you know, showing up and speaking as the applicant? I mean, he should be speaking in support of it, but it really needs, it's our obligation to get these standards in place. So why aren't we like taking that over and owning this process going forward?
Well, I think we are. I mean, I think in this case, city-initiated code amendments are generally at the direction of city council or planning commission. In this case, the applicant identified it and brought it first, so they got it off the ground. But at this point, staff has taken the lead in drafting the ordinance and moving it forward at this point. So I think really the next step would be for commission to make a recommendation, which then allows us to move this on to the city council. And just one point of clarification, this is a body of 7, so any motion to move it forward would need to have at least 4 votes.
I will move to, I'll bring a motion to move it forward with the amendments as proposed, and I would include the language as Sally suggested about basements.
Can you repeat the amendments?
Yeah, someone needs to, I think we've heard a lot of discussion, so someone should
Phoebe's
summarize
always
where
really
we.
good about
Yeah, I
summarizing.
don't know where we stand actually, because even staff agreed with some of it, so I don't know what the current proposal is.
I guess, I mean, staff could take a stab at providing a list of what we've heard, and then I guess maybe that could be a starting point, because I think the key would be at the recommendation, being clear enough that we have direction on how to update the ordinance before it goes to council. So provide language to allow for basements, consistent with how they're allowed in an R1 district. Then also reduce lot coverage by 5% when a structure is 2-story or over 20 feet. And I think those were the only 2 that had consensus, so, but that's a starting point if you want, but if for any additional ones, just be clear enough so staff has good direction on how to incorporate it into the ordinance.
Is that a motion? Yeah.
Yeah, I second the motion.
Okay, I just want to be clear on what we're voting on. So it's lot coverage is what?
As drafted right now, it's.
No, what we're voting on.
What's
our motion?
What's our, yeah.
The motion, there's only, the motion is to approve the ordinance as drafted with 2 changes. One, to include language to allow basements, and the second is for lot coverage, reduce the lot coverage by 5%. So for structures that are over 20 feet in height or 2 stories, the lot coverage would not be 40%, it would be 35%. But unless the commission wants to change it, right now the FAR is at 40%.
And so, which functionally then, you end up with 40% FAR unless you go 2 stories, at which point it goes down to 35.
There's a difference between floor area and lot coverage. Floor area stays the same. Floor area, you count it double on a 2nd story. Lot coverage is just purely the footprint on the ground. So the difference is you could have a 4,000 square foot house that has a 2,000 square foot lot coverage if it's one stacked on front of the other. So that's the difference in the control.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
And I'm a nay, even though I fully support getting standards in this neighborhood, but I can't support these tonight.
And which is it that you can't support?
I'm still not comfortable with the combination of setbacks relative to whether you call them flag lots or not, and 2 stories, and sort of the whole mix of the math, to me, should be looked at. I would feel better if I looked at it more carefully, and I just can't. Although I appreciate the amendments that have been made, I think those help. But I still haven't gotten beyond the whole mix. Still is not quite there for me. That's all. And I completely agree. It's on us, on the city, to figure this out at this point.
Okay. And I'm still trying to figure out where I'm at.
Well, so I guess there's a motion and there's a vote. So wait, did that
So,
pass?
I haven't voted yet. I'm still trying to figure out my vote, sorry. Sorry, I just started needing to write. So the floor area ratio, coverage is 35 or 40, going down to 35 if you go up to.
It would be 40% for a one-story and 35% for a two-story or a tall one-story.
Got it. Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to me. I could support it at 35, but I just feel like 40% coverage and the areas that we're talking about for these lots that are so close to each other and everything else just, again, to me feels like we're adding too much intensity above and beyond what's.
So you're referring to floor area, correct, or coverage? Or
I'm
both?
sorry, did I say, no, I'm referring to floor area. So I'm going to vote no. Any other motions?
I would just suggest, and I'm not sure what the next step is. Maybe there's some revisions and it, or what, I mean.
At this point, you've made your recommendation, so it would move on to city council. If the 35 versus 40 is the sticking point, maybe there's a opportunity for a successful recommendation using that.
That seems to be the only sticking point.
That we were 3-2, yeah, because we don't have a full commission and not everyone is present, so would it still worthwhile for them? Ultimately, they're gonna make that decision.
That's true. That's true. Though what I would suggest is I really got a lot out of reading this R110 side by side with this, and it's what, I would recommend that is going hand in hand.
So actually, just a clarification, Steve just pulled up the ordinance. It says if the commission, disapproval by the commission shall be final, provided, however, the decision may be appealed to the council. So if you deny it, it stops.
So the applicant.
Would then have to file an appeal to get it to council.
The city has no standards on this area. How is it not, like, we have to put some standards. It can't continue as a Bermuda Triangle of Los Altos with no rules.
The one thing that I'll say is the difference between the difference between the 35 and the 40, if you go to a second story, from the map, it might not be possible to add, even if you say 40 on one story, with the driveway and the setbacks and their backyard, they won't be able to add anything. So I don't know if the one story and the two story 45 versus 35, or sorry, 40 versus 35, I don't know if that makes sense in the scheme of things. But if it means that we can maybe pass this, I think that I would be willing to say 35 across the board would be fine if we can all get on that same page. Because I'd rather move it with something rather than be like that, or whatever the wording says.
I mean, I think maybe there's an opportunity if you want to make a motion to move it forward with a 35% FAR.
Go ahead. I'll make a motion. Can I make a motion? I'll make a motion to move it forward at a 35% FAR.
I'll second.
So the motion basically, same motion as before, but then also reduce the FAR to 35%.
Yep.
And that's Alex and then Duval.
Which I think has to also then reduce, by definition, lot coverage to 35, right?
Yeah, so lot coverage, you always want the floor area.
Yeah.
Well, you could have a larger lot coverage than floor area to allow for covered porches. So you want both floor area and lot coverage at 35%?
I'm fine with leaving the lot coverage at 40 and allowing for softer structures.
Isn't it the other way around?
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
for,
So,
No.
the coverage can't be smaller than the FAR, but the coverage can be larger because you
yeah,
have covered porches.
right, that's what I'm saying, I'm fine with the 40%. Duho, is that, are you okay?
You motion that, right?
Yeah. All right,
I feel like that's just a mistake, but I think you'll overrule me. You know, an area that is allowed to have, you know, greater density is trying to accomplish more in less space, so I think that it's appropriate to have the higher FAR. And I feel like if we're fixing this, it just feels like the, you know, minority of two is going to guide the direction of this area, and I feel like if we had a full commission.
I think it's imperative to move the debate to the city council.
But if it goes as 35, it is extremely likely to just be frozen at that number, and I don't think it's the right number. So I couldn't support that, based on that reason. I'd like to see it go forward with them having the explanation that we were, you know, the vote was 3-2, and they need to make the decision, as opposed to we are recommending 35%. It's a difference.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, the mechanism here does not allow that to happen, and that the applicant would have to appeal, right?
I mean, the alternative, if you want to do it, would be to keep it with the body and continue to a date certain where their sixth commissioner would be present, and maybe that changes things. If you don't want to just deny it and force the appeal.
well,
There is a motion and a second.
Do I have the opportunity to ask, since there is an applicant, do I have the opportunity to ask the applicant? So I'd like to ask the applicant if he'd like us to take a vote now, approving it at 35% and moving it forward, or delaying this to a date certain when we may or may not have a full commission.
Well, one thing I could say is that I'm 72. I'd like to get this, you know, underway before I'd hate to have you pass it because the poor guy died and you put it through because you were feeling sorry for me. So, joking aside, I want to see it get done. So we're talking about, most of these lots are 10,000 square feet. So a couple of things I'd like to clarify. These lots are almost the same size as the typical R110s. Our setbacks are not less than they are right now, except for where they didn't build them right. One of these is built actually across the property line, so that's known because we did the survey. And another thing I'd like to clarify is that it's about 20% conforming now in our view, and it would be about, if we went to 15 feet, it would be about something in the neighborhood of 80% conforming. But again, I agree with staff that these are not precise numbers except where we've ground truthed them, and they're pretty good there, but you know, there's a lot of variation. But back to your coverage, that's about 500 square feet you're talking about. And you know, most of these are not going to get 2 stories. It's very expensive to build 2 stories. It's unlikely. Basements are even less likely. We looked into it. We were going to put our garage underneath, and we found out you can't do that in Los Altos unless the garage doesn't face the street. Well, that would be great for the flag lots. Sorry, flag lots. The ones in the back, but the ones up front face directly at the street, so that wasn't an option. So we've looked at a lot of variations here. I don't really care if it's 35. I would say 35, make it 35, not reducing it for a second story. I really don't see the underlying rationale for reducing it for a second story. You know, it's not like you can build higher density. If you go up, you're still limited by the square footage. So you go up or you go out. You know, it's really 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I would like to see it approved or not approved. I'd like to see you know, send it on to council, and we'll probably have it. I'm sure this is a very unique situation. I'm sure we'll have a very interesting council meeting to discuss this, but I'd just like to see it get done. This has been a year and a half for us right now, and I can say that all those figures, we had our architect do them, including the 500 surrounding ones, the neighborhood ones, the setback ones. It's cost a fair chunk of change. So, you know, we're in $20,000 into doing this, plus 2 fees to the city. And to your point, I think the city should have done it. That's been my view. But it wasn't going to happen. These guys over here weren't born when this thing happened. Literally, I don't think. And, you know, so it's not their fault, but they were the only ones that knew about it. The mayor didn't know, the council didn't know, the planning commission didn't know. They've come and gone. The only people that knew is, it was Zach that I ran into the first time. He happened to be at the desk, and I said, gee, I want to know what I can do. And he said, sure, what's the address? I typed in the address, and he, big long look on his face, and he handed me this little paper out of a cubby hole, and it said, sorry. So I said, what do I do about that? That was May 2 years ago. So we're 2 years in. Then we filed, and then it's all been going through. But it wouldn't have happened unless we'd filed. I mean, it just wasn't going to happen, so that's why we did it. We'd like to make this happen. We'd like to update the neighborhood. So, long-winded, but answers your question, I think.
All right, we'll try to save you an appeal fee.
I'm going to withdraw my objection. Like the applicant doesn't care if it's 35 or 40. I was trying to do more for him and them in the neighborhood. So if he's okay with 35, I'm not going to object to it. And we can move it forward, and you can move forward.
Okay, so we've got, and just to be clear though, we're not recommending further reduction from 35 for second story. I mean, to go to 30, right? It's just 35.
The motion that's on the table right now is to recommend approval of the ordinance as drafted with the following 2 changes. One, to include language to allow basements, and the second one is to maintain the 40% lot coverage and reduce the floor area ratio to 35%. That's
Yep.
as I understand the motion that's on the table.
Correct. Just for the applicant's edification, we're not reducing the floor area ratio from going up to second story. So that's a motion, and we have a second, so we'll take it to a vote. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Oh, sorry.
But I definitely support this going to council.
Okay, but, so we have, is that a yes? A nay. So 5, 4 to 1. Commission. Okay, great. So, there's a discussion for the downtown vision presentation and FAR review on the agenda. Are you guys prepared to do that, or do we need John for that?
I think that's at the commission's discretion. So Director John Biggs was not able to make it tonight. We did add, at the request of the commission, you had originally discussed floor area ratios and requested that staff provide additional information to better understand the topic at hand. So as part of that, as outlined in the staff report, we did provide with a copy of the downtown vision plan, and then we did also provide kind of a a chart that outlined floor area ratios within each district. John is definitely the most well-versed on the topic. I can definitely provide some input. I'm familiar, but not as thoroughly competent on the topic as he is. So I'll leave it at the commission's discretion if you would like to continue this to your next meeting, or if you want to take it on and discuss it tonight. And I can elaborate more on the topic if you want, or help facilitate the discussion as you see fit.
I mean, I was really hoping to get a presentation on the downtown visioning. It's sort of the key for understanding the direction that we should be pushing changes. So I'm in favor of postponing it.
And I would agree. I mean, I actually went back and listened to whatever the date was where we heard this when we talked about the FAR. And we really were kind of puzzled by that whole discussion about, we weren't that supportive of what we really wanted to do was hear the downtown vision plan presented. So I would agree to wait till we can hear it presented.
I fully support the fellow commissioners' thoughts.
Okay, so Zach, I don't know what's on the next hearing, but I'll just leave it to your discretion to put it on our agenda as soon as possible. That would make sense and not keep us here till midnight.
Definitely. Just to give you a brief update on our upcoming agendas, the next Planning Commission meeting is canceled, as both John and I will be out that week. The following meeting is scheduled for 4th of July, so I'm assuming nobody wants to be here that evening, so that meeting will be canceled as well. So our next regularly scheduled meeting will be July 18th. On that meeting right now, we have the study session for 440 First Street scheduled. We also potentially have a second study session for a new project at 376 First Street. And then I think on that agenda as well, we also have code amendments for the downtown CRS district to look at expanding the allowable uses, primarily to look at personal services. So that's what's on the agenda. So this item could be moved there, or if that's too much for that meeting, we can always move it to the following one as well. But
my recommendation would put it onto that. I mean, we're just dealing with so much in downtown right now. That would be nice to be able to deal with this sooner rather than later, and maybe not put the cart in front of the horse for too much longer.
And we can keep our materials.
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioners' reports and comments. Any potential future agenda items?
Council meetings?
I think a future agenda item that we talked about was to get on the same page as the peer review architect.
Yes.
And so I'd love, it's clear to me that we need to kind of get on the same page with him or her. I don't know who it is.
Let's see, so, and May 28th was Phoebe, so that's why there's no.
That's
City
my
council.
issue. And don't we have an issue because there's an upcoming council meeting where the new
that's-
commissioner that we don't have is
That
supposed to,
meeting's-
but I can't move up because I'm going to be out for that date.
Why don't we just take that offline and we'll figure out who can.
We'll figure out who covers one of the council meeting.
I feel like I saw applications were like submitted.
The council does have commissioner interviews, and appointment of a new commissioner is scheduled for the upcoming council meeting.
Okay, so with that, we'll adjourn.